Hold on, just checking. Did you folks send anything in? I'm just checking our website.
We did not. We don't have anything
Okay.
formal to present.
Okay, that's fine.
Answer your questions.
Oh, shoot, we're live.
Okay, we usually wait to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, good morning. This morning, we are getting an update from the Department for Children and Families on the implementation of the governor's executive order, as well as, other things that are happening in the DCF arena. There seems to be no lack of DCF being in the hot seat. I guess I'm kind of getting used to it, right?
2 years later, I'm sorry, I'm not getting used to it.
I know, yeah. Well,
You don't want to.
I know, it is probably something that is preferable not to get used to. So, but thank you both for being here this morning. It would be helpful if we could hear from you exactly how this executive order is being implemented, because, I'm hearing from the field in different places, want to be clear, not just from one place or individual, but from different places, that there's some confusion about people who meet the criteria under the governor's executive order, but are still being asked to leave, and or people who are in the hotel, have been in the hotels, and still have part of their 80 days left and aren't being renewed or having difficulty being renewed. So maybe, if you could go through the process that you're using, and if there is anything different about the process that you are using now, or it feels like you're essentially running two programs now. And I don't know if that's the way it seems to you, but that's the way it seems from the outside.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Chris Winters. I'm the Commissioner of the Department for Children and Families, and I'll make just a few overarching statements here and then turn it over to the Deputy Commissioner, who can talk to you about how things are playing out on the ground as we try to implement the executive order. And, I'll say, as you all know, we all would love to have a lot of lead time and preparation for any transition in this program. And here we are again. It was very short notice for all of us to try to implement this. I think the preference was that there be an agreement, well in advance of April 1st, but for many reasons that didn't happen. So we do have this executive order that prioritizes and extends the stay for a certain population of folks. And so we're over the last 2 weeks, we've been working kind of nonstop to make that happen, the medically vulnerable population, and trying to assess who that is and verify who that is, and that the right people are staying in the program under the executive order has obviously been challenging. And I'm sure you're hearing about some of those challenges. I'll turn it over at this point to the Deputy Commissioner to talk about how we've gone about this. Once we knew, I think it was on March 28th, that the executive order would go into place on April 1st. Miranda.
Good morning. For the record, Miranda Graham, the Deputy Commissioner of the Economic Services Division. And as the Commissioner said, it was a quick turnaround. So on the 28th, when the executive order came out, we quickly put together a letter and had that sent to all the hotels around 6 p.m. that evening, with the request of the hotel management to put that on under people's doors, so that we were notifying the Vermonters that were in the hotels of the change that had just happened and how to contact us. I will say that we are always trying to be prepared and not to have rushes at the beginning of the month. So we had also already authorized hundreds of households who we knew hadn't used all of their 80 days into April. This is important because that's going to get into Madam Chair's question about what's happening right now. So we had a lot of households the beginning of the month, and I know this is always a tricky subject. We have people that have income contributions when they have either their Social Security income coming in, they have employment. And so we had people also who in the beginning of April were paying for their own stay in a hotel room. April 1st also implemented the 1,100 room cap. We had, I want to say it was 1,450, but it might have been a little bit more households, right? So we also knew that there were going to be folks who are not going to be eligible. So on that Monday, we did delay opening our phone lines just a little bit because we needed to be able to train our staff about what had just been implemented on Friday. So we had made that decision of to close the phone lines for a half hour to try to ground our staff. And this is what's happening today. We had incredibly long wait times. I know I've heard from my own colleagues at another department, which is always hard, and we are only able to uplift our phone lines so much. You can add 100 new people who don't know the program onto phones. So I do apologize. I know that was really impactful for people for that first. It was the 31st and the 1st of April. By the 2nd of April, phone lines were back to our normal, which is, it can be seconds before someone has the phone answered, or it could be a couple of minutes. But that's kind of our standard on that line normally. So we are implementing, if you are eligible under Act 113, you haven't used your 80 days, then you are eligible for the program if there are rooms available. And then the executive order, and let me know if I'm going into detail that everybody knows and don't need me to do that. Okay. So the executive order prioritizes families that with custody of children under the age of 19, and then also households that were medically vulnerable. And that with the medically vulnerable is defined as people who are homebound and need assistance or use medical equipment. Those living on a life-saving device that requires electricity, such as an oxygen machine. Individuals undergoing active cancer treatment or treatment for severe heart, kidney, or liver disease. Those receiving home-based nursing services. And women in their 3rd trimester of pregnancy or entering into their 3rd trimester of pregnancy between April 1st and June 30th. So
Can I just ask a question about that? How, what kind of documentation are you requiring for people on the medical side of things?
So there was a group that we were able, with our partners in Department of Vermont Health Access, Department of Aging and Independent Living, and then also our Vermont Chronic Care nurses. So people that already had connections or we were privy to their medical needs that we were able to pre-authorize. That was around 100 households. So for others, we allowed a self-attestation and we provisionally housed for up to 7 days. So we're saying and this gave us enough time. We needed to be able to understand what type of release was needed to be able to get medical records to the professionals across those same departments and organizations that I just mentioned to be able to get medical records from someone's physician. So, and I think Wednesday, that form, so April 3rd, that form was completed. And so as we started taking phone calls that afternoon, we were able to then also say, okay, you're self-attesting. We had some screening questions that had been developed. And then we were able to say, this is the form you needed. For those that we had spoken to on Monday and Tuesday, we did outreach as our phone lines were quieter at the end of the week to try to contact households. We're not usually very successful with that. But tried to be able to say, this is the form that you need to have your medical professional complete and also authorize the release of medical records. And for those that we weren't able to reach, we knew they were going to be calling us again on Monday or Tuesday because of the up to 7 days provisional. So when they called in, then we said, here's the form that you need to do. And then we gave another up to 7 days. So if someone said, I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow, they don't need 7 days. We say okay, however, 2 or 3 days so that we can get this form to you, you can get it completed and sent back up to us.
So the form was a release? Is that what you're saying? A release of information so then you could request medical records?
So it was both. There is, and we can send you over a copy, but there is the ability for the medical professional to say they meet one of these medically vulnerable definitions, but then also for the participant to be able to say, I'm releasing my medical records because if it wasn't clear, and I can say we've received some records that it still isn't clear that they meet one of these definitions, where others it is very clear that they meet one of these definitions. Because I should say it isn't just that I have a machine that needs that requires electricity, it is that I also am using that machine actively. So some people have things that are prescribed to them, but they maybe haven't used them in months because they don't need them on a daily basis. So to that level, our medical professionals are looking at that detail.
Great, thank you. And then just before you move on, you did talk about the phone lines, and I'm just, were people not able to go to their local district office, to do this transaction in person, or did you allow emails before or, exchange like that you're not allowing anymore? What is the process? It's making it sound like people had to call in order to have this transaction and that was difficult, especially during that initial time.
Absolutely. So people can always go to our district office. It will still involve a phone call, but at that point, you will have one of my staff in my district office that if someone needs support or if they didn't have a phone, we have a phone that people can use. Or if you need help getting through that process, then we would also have one of our team members help people. But essentially, it is our housing unit and our contractor that also supports the housing that we have kept trained, not all of our other staff that are in the district offices. So you are going to end up on
Essentially, you have to, it doesn't matter where you go, you have to be on the phone.
you're going to end up on the phone. Right. But if someone truly can't, then we will also help. I mean, we could be on the phone talking to the person and then relaying information for them.
So is that the same for like, you mentioned the chronic care initiative and the Department of Disabilities, Aging and Independent Living's staff, or DIVA or any of those kind of folks. So is all that information coming to you via phone? Like do the chronic care nurses need to be on the phone with you, giving you information, or are you accepting that via email?
So that is accepted, and it's not necessarily, I guess we are using email. That we already knew who those folks were. And so that is like, we have a list. And so if Miranda calls in, we are able to see like, yes, Miranda is working with BCCI and they have already, because of their work with her, they know that she meets one of these definitions. And so then when people are calling us, is their authorized rep. So a client has to engage with economic services for every time there is an authorization. So we can make sure, is that hotel working for them? Do they still meet the eligibility criteria? Is the hotel willing to have that person continue to stay? And then we just have, I think what you're asking, we really only have one authorized rep who serves a little under 10% of the households that we're serving, who has had an exception made, and they engage through email, I think more than we were aware of until this last major change.
And so they're not being allowed to do that anymore.
To some extent, no, because what it is essentially is you can't just work a list of one person, as we have other Vermonters on the line, and we only have 1,100 rooms, right? So just sit there and just work one person's list means essentially everybody else who might be looking for a room that day is not going to get a room.
I get that, but what if the people are already in the hotels and they already meet the criteria? So that doesn't, what you're saying doesn't make sense to me. I'll have to be honest.
Right, I know. So I think it really comes down to capacity, which I think is a theme that we have had this entire session and beyond. Is that we have a limited number of rooms. Over the winter, we ended up with over 900 households who were eligible, who never received any time in the hotels this winter. And I do understand, I know that it is not lost on me that people felt like once you were in, you should be able to stay in. That isn't necessarily the reality. There is movement. We have people come and go. Some people might just end up for a weekend. And so we have to engage around that.
Okay, I'm not sure if that answered the question. Go ahead, Representative McGill.
I have kind of two separate topics. I wanted to talk a little bit more about you said you were getting releases for their medical treatment, their files. Are you taking that and storing that?
We, DCF, are not. So it is going to the Department of Vermont Health Access, or if it makes more sense for Dale to have this, it's going to the appropriate, because one of the things that we have known in DCF is we just don't have this medical expertise. And so we have called on our sister departments to be able to help provide that support.
Okay, and so is that information stored within those departments? Like, how is that? Is it connected to their file?
It is connected to their file if they're known to us. Not everyone is known. And if we don't necessarily, there are systems, and this is where I apologize, I'm not familiar with the systems because I don't work within healthcare, but you have the ability to look at medical records electronically too, because of how providers have moved that way. So it's really about a release, but for some people, if they don't have that connection, right, we have some folks who don't have a primary care position, they maybe engage more with emergency rooms. We would be looking to get those records.
Okay, and I'd like to know more. You can answer that just for those people where it's not already in the system, what that process looks like. And then I'm just wondering, I've seen, people have to sign a release for you all to access medical records. How long, when they do that, how long is the release good for? And are they really talk through kind of the parameters of that and what that means for them? I'm looking to see how to revoke that if they should want to.
Yeah, I'm looking to see if I can find, but if not, I will follow up for you. The language, I do know.
It's, I found it here. It's, if I don't revoke or update this in authorization, it'll be in effect as long as I'm receiving services from the Vermont Department for Children and Families Economic Services Division.
Okay, and so then what would happen? Let's say they no longer, they move out. If it's a happy moment, they find housing, what would the process be? Because that sounds like then it would kind of revoke, or is it any services? Let's say they move out, but they continue to receive food stamps. Does that mean you still could access?
I think it's a good question. We'll send you the form so that you can see it and see the language, and then we'll ask those questions.
Okay, so thank you.
Thank you. I need to interrupt just for a moment. You can stay right where you are, but there's a whole timing and series of events that have to take place this morning around what's going to happen on the floor in a little bit. So I need to interrupt just for a moment to do a straw poll on the amendment that Anne had been working on a couple of days ago and that I forwarded to you all yesterday. So I'm just going to ask Anne to review that, and then we'll just do a straw poll. And Esme has sent in her yes, and Representative McGuire said he's okay with that. And so then we'll just do a straw poll.
Sure, this is just the spot in the education bill where the disability categories are identified. The label on them, if you will, are high cost, medium cost, low cost. And we felt it was more appropriate not to tag them with cost level for everyone's thinking of them in terms of, oh, you have a high cost, but simply like with the English as a second language where they have level 1, level 2, that we would just title it category A, category B, category C to substitute the financial. It still ties into the per pupil weighting of who has higher weight for financials because it is a higher cost disability to accommodate. But the language just titles it as A, B, and C rather than high cost, medium cost, low cost.
Essentially, it's just trying not to further stigmatize special education students by putting in statute that a reference that we didn't do for English language learners, which are also higher cost, so they are in the bill as tiers. And so we're just saying essentially something similar with special education students. Yes, go ahead.
I'll just share that as we were initially talking about this, the thought in my head was, does this leave some degree of vagueness if we just change it to A, B, and C? And so I was pleased to see, as I looked more closely last night at the amendment, the definition section still provides all the detail that's necessary
Yes.
to ensure that there isn't anything lost.
It's not just generic, right?
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. No change in the definition of what those categories include.
Yeah. Anybody have any other questions or need to understand that further before we do a straw poll? Okay, so all those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? Okay. All right, thank you very much. So back to the topic at hand. That would be great.
Where did we leave off?
Skills question.
And then, more questions after I can see the form. I'm just wondering, so, it's the Act 113, so we have the 1,100 rooms for Act 113. what's the room situation like? If we get to that point where those who qualify under Act 113, let's say is 1,100, would you be using rooms for the executive order under that 1,100? I'm just wondering if we get down to a number crunch, would you be housing folks who are there under the executive order using those 1,100 rooms?
Great question. And so, yeah, the executive order didn't change the number of rooms that are being used. So we are using 1,100 rooms for both those that qualify under Act 113 and then those that had their stay extended under the executive order.
So let's say someone, say a gentleman with a disability but doesn't use a mobile, doesn't need electricity or use a mobility device, has done their 60 days, so they still have days left under the law passed by the legislature, that is in effect, and you have that 1,100 rooms, but there's someone who qualifies under the executive order, you would remove that person.
So we don't remove people.
Or
People-
exit.
Right, well, people have their hotel stay authorized and so
Yeah.
a set number of days. And that is why everyone has to call and engage with us when their last day that they would need to be checking out. And then it is who is on that day of calling us looking for a room.
Okay. So they would get their full 80 days?
No,
Not-
not
okay.
necessarily.
So you could possibly, they wouldn't be able to renew and make use of their 80 days.
If the rooms were filled, just like all winter where we've had households that aren't able to get in even though they're eligible.
Yeah, but and you state on your website, we have our tents, our language is first come, first serve. So you are possibly not renewing or having, people could lose their housing for this separate other executive order, if there are not enough rooms.
Yeah, but I think it's been this way all winter because there is movement. People can come in and then people go out. And sometimes it is they have moved on. They have, to your point, like it's a success. They have found permanent housing, and other times it is, we just don't have capacity. We don't have enough room.
Be a person in their room who has time and could renew, but they're being moved in.
All winter long. That has been, there is no change to that even last fall, this has been a reality of the program of there aren't enough spaces to keep everybody in for their days, consecutively necessarily. Although we have some people who are, and not everyone who the state isn't able to pay actually leaves the hotel.
I want to just follow up on something that's related to this. It is confusing. It's no matter, it's no wonder that people out in the field are confused. So I think, so I'm trying to also figure out, so for the people who meet the executive order, which extends it until June 30th. So in the executive order, you're right, doesn't say anything about 1,100, an extension of the 1,100 rooms. But since they're already in a room and they've already been verified, do they still have to go through a periodic re-upping? If they have you've already determined that they are a person who meets the executive order criteria and they have already, been certified or whatever, by your contractor that they have the qualifying conditions, which enables them to stay till June 30th. They still have to re-up or, whatever that process, that re-engagement process.
Yes.
So I guess I don't really understand why.
So, and again, I'm not sure how to explain this in a different way or the one that people find acceptable, but there is the engagement. Not everyone wants to stay where they're placed. Not every hotel wants people to stay that are placed with them. And so there is, and we need to be able to know as well, if someone left 3 days ago, we ask hotels to let us know this, but that doesn't always happen. And we don't want to have a room that is empty and not be putting the next person into it.
Right. I
So
get
we have these engagements, and then there is, the law says that people need to self-pay. So the executive order that was for those housed on March 31st, right? So you can be a part of this March cohort, but you might have needed to start self-paying on April 1st. And then you're done self-paying on April 5th. We have to see, like, where are we at with this 1,100 room cap? And as I was mentioning at the very beginning, we have been authorizing households into April that hadn't used their 80 days. So some days we have 3 rooms that are going to be available unless we learn from talking to hotels that people left. And maybe we have more, but there are other days, maybe we have 100 rooms. And so it isn't a perfect science. And for us, we didn't have a lot of lead time to be able to say, and we didn't know, even this, around 100 households, we have more than 100 households who are self-attesting to the fact that we meet the medical vulnerability definition. So, right, we didn't know how many rooms that they would need to be able to say, like, oh, this group has this many rooms. And this is how many other rooms that we have. We didn't have that ability to do that.
You had an estimate. I mean, you were giving us estimates of the number of people who met that criteria that you had been proposing. So, I mean, it's not like it was a total unknown. You had a pretty good estimate. Representative Bishop was first and then Representative Steady.
So I'm just not leaving this topic yet, trying to get clarification. So let's assume I'm at day 60, so I have time left. And today is the day of my periodic check-in. Let's assume there's exactly 1,100 rooms in use. Will the system show that there's an individual whose time is coming up for check-in and that room is assumed to be available until I check in? And if I don't check in until 2 p.m. and someone else has called before me, that room is gone, even though I've called on the day that I was supposed to check in.
Correct.
Representative Steady.
I was gonna write it down so it made more sense. Okay. I know the answer, but I would like to hear it from you. It is true. Is it true? I'll put it in a question. Some hotels are not a one size fit all, that some hotels do not house families with children due to issues.
That is correct. We have some hotels that either they choose to not have families or we have chosen to not place families there. And one comes into mind, it was the local municipalities had decided that the space was not a safe space for families.
That's good. Yes, go ahead, Representative Steady.
So is it true that they could have 3 rooms available at that hotel, but you couldn't move a family there?
Yes, that's true.
Okay.
Representative Bishop.
I have, I guess, a broader, more general question, something that's been sitting with me over the last 2 weeks when the governor and the secretary started talking about the April 1st deadline coming up and the references they were making to the 135 individuals who have died in the emergency housing program. The governor said, we know the hotel program hasn't been good for people in it. The secretary went on to say, it's not just ineffective, it's putting vulnerable lives at risk. She later went on and said, if we saw this many deaths in any other programs, there would be demand for change. So I guess I'm curious, has there been an internal demand for change at the department? Has she specified what change she would like to see at the department?
I think, thank you, Representative. I think broadly speaking, we can all agree that the hotel motel program is not the ideal, and we'd love to move away from it into other things. That's why we continue to push for more traditional shelters, more supports and services. I think this committee heard a lot of testimony and has taken a step in that direction with H91. There are a number of things that we'd like to try to do in the coming fiscal year to better serve the people who are in hotels and motels while we still have to use them as we move away from them. And we'll be, I think, having some of that discussion on the Senate side around the language that's in the budget for FY26. I think that includes a narrower focus on who we're trying to serve, additional case management, required engagement to make sure that when we do use hotels, that we have a closer connection to the people in them. But it's always been extremely challenging. We've tried to deliver services in hotels with mixed success, very little success, I'll say. And so that's why we want to move away from it.
Is there change that's envisioned that can be put in place absent awaiting Senate action, overall legislative action, and the timeline of
Yes,
implementation?
yes,
of
we
it?
are looking at the things that we are authorized to do already under the existing program and existing laws. Things like case management are things that we could, if we can muster the internal resources,
Mhm.
we can do a better job of that right now. We can hold, and we have been holding hotels to a higher standard for health and safety. For some of those things that we were just talking about earlier, there are a number of things that we can do under existing law to do better with the system that we currently have, knowing that we need to move away from that system.
Because I think we all agree that a number of 135 is shocking. So
Yeah.
I hope that there are changes that can be made on a timeline that helps these folks that we've all agree are vulnerable.
Thank you.
Just as a follow-up to that, I'm just wondering if there is any tracking with your community partners about the number of people who may have died not being in shelter.
I think we have done some work on that with the Department of Health. If you recall, Miranda, what the results of that was.
I don't, but we can get that for you. I think it is a little bit trickier. I've learned from my counterparts at the Department of Health of just understanding, because we don't necessarily know where someone was, and it is about where someone physically passed away. And so there are just some challenges with that, but we can get you what we were able to understand.
And what about in our formal shelter system?
We also, yes, tried to look at that, also somewhat challenging. But we do have some
You
information.
do have, if I'm recalling correctly, it's fairly low numbers in the traditional shelter system.
I would hope so. I mean,
But much lower in comparison to what we see in
Yes.
state.
Okay, and so I'm sorry, we started asking you questions and you weren't finished speaking, so I didn't know if you had other things that you wanted to elaborate on.
I think you've hit on, some of the major pain points that we're working through to make sure that we do serve people. We're going to see with these 7-day provisionals, we're going to come up against those 7 days and we'll see if people were able to provide the medical records and documentation. As the deputy commissioner said, we did have a pretty good idea of who we thought we knew were in the medically vulnerable category, but we've seen a significant number of people who are self-attesting to it. So we just need to verify that, and we'll see how that comes out over the next couple of days.
Representative
I do have the question on the ground now. We know there are 1,100 rooms that are being used. Do you know, are we using 1,100 rooms every single night at this point? Even with the executive order, are people aren't done with their 80 days yet? Those who are no longer eligible to pay. So.
Yeah, so it is right around 1,100. So I think when we pull data every Tuesday for Monday, and so we were at 1,099. So, but yeah, I know yesterday we were at 1,100 rooms.
Okay. So in other words, excuse me, but that means priorities, decisions have to be made about where people sit. And I'm just wondering if people who have vouchers or if the executive order is superseding their availability. But it sounds like it's what makes the decision is if someone's called by a certain hour in the day. That's what makes the decision.
So that it was that we are trying to look at, because I think to the point, right, there is a lot of confusion. I've heard it myself is, well, we assumed anyone under the executive order would get to stay. So you are part of that cohort. We know that, and we are trying to make that happen. It's just not happening, I think, as quickly as people would like for it to, but that's because I'm not going and asking people to leave who still have time on their voucher, who haven't used their 80 days.
Right. So at this point, there are people that are under the executive order, protected under the executive order, who, if I understand you correctly, are not being housed.
They could, the state is not paying for them to stay in the
There's-
hotel. A lot, I can't say definitively because I don't necessarily know.
Under the program.
Under the, yes,
Yes, okay, yes. So there are
That is
people
correct.
who are not being housed under the program.
and we are trying
I see.
to fix that.
So, I mean, I think it's fair to say exactly what you just said, Miranda, that people were making the assumption that people covered under the executive order would, essentially be automatically being able to stay because they were supposedly the highest priority. And that doesn't sound exactly like what's happening, even though I understand what you're saying is that you're trying to make that happen. In the meantime, some of those people who the administration has identified as being even more vulnerable than what the legislature had already identified as being vulnerable, are not being housed. And I think that's problematic. And I understand the complications that you've gone through with trying to implement an executive order on a short notice and not something the legislature did to you, something you've done to yourselves. So that's, it's unfortunate because, I think that the public perception from what has gone out from the administration all along is that these people would be continued to be housed. And the fact is that some of them are not. And that's, we find that not acceptable. So go ahead, Representative Steady, and then Representative Bishop.
I did some research last night and there's a lot of shelters being offered. There's a lot of resources being offered. Is that given to the people that are exiting so they know to call 211, find out where I can go? Because it looks like there's quite a few resources from my research last night.
Representative, that's always an option for people to call, but we find that our shelters are almost always full.
Okay.
We have about 680 shelter beds now statewide, which is a huge improvement over where we have been in the past, but they're very much being used.
And they do get that, like, how to contact just in case there is room.
If someone's in GA, they probably are very familiar with calling 211 or calling resources to try
Years
to stay
ago,
in.
we couldn't get people to go to the shelters. They only wanted a motel room. So that's changed.
The program requires that they use a shelter first
Okay.
before getting a hotel room.
Shelter first state.
And years ago, it was hotel first.
Yeah.
Okay.
Representative Bishop, and then we have a couple of questions about the youth facility.
I'm not sure if this is repetitious of the prior question or I'm asking something a little bit different. Let's assume someone who fits the criteria of the executive order is able to get housing. Are they subject to the same periodic check-ins? Or if they meet the executive order, can they stay through the end of their 80 days without any additional check-ins?
Or through June 30th.
So
Yeah.
they are subject to check-ins because we have to ensure that they still have this need, that nothing has changed, if they have income, that they're, what days they need to pay for. But as we move forward, it will be, if you are under this executive order, you'll be able to stay through June 30th. Right now, this month, because we were pre-authorizing people that hadn't used their 80 days into April, that is the issue that we have right now is we have people in the rooms because we didn't stop authorizing people. We did our normal process and then it was, here's this group of people who can stay in addition, but
Okay.
we were still with the 1,100 rooms. So that's where our challenge lies, that we will work out of.
So at the outset, or at least when we were having discussions about this, there was approximately 425 or so households that fell under this category that was being laid out in the executive order. So in the meantime, since, now it has been a couple of weeks, have you further refined that number of households who actually qualify? And of those, how many households are not currently in shelter, but do qualify under the executive order, including the self-attestations?
So I will need to get the total number. As I said, that's evolving because of the self-attestation piece. But right now, as of April 7th, we had 230 households under the executive order that we're housing.
As opposed to the originally stated 400 and whatever.
It's about 200 less than what had been originally provided to us.
This is probably not, I can assure you, this is not including households that might otherwise be eligible. So, but I will get you
All right.
that full picture of why you're asking is how many we know are eligible, how many others. I do know we've had 217 households that tested to meeting the definition of medically vulnerable. And of those, we've had 18 who've provided their medical documentation.
So that those 217 are not included in the 230?
I want to double check. I don't want to misspeak.
I was going to say, it doesn't make sense that they are.
Can't be, you're right. Because
Uh,
then there's no families.
So that, right, right, okay. Alrighty, so we're gonna, I just need to switch topics just for a minute. Yeah, oh, yeah, I forgot about that one. So in the press this week, we saw in the 7 Days article about the contractor who is running the Red Clover program in Middlesex and who the department has retained. So you're off the hot seat now for a minute, and I'm glad about that. Yeah.
Coming back to
And so I guess a couple of things. So I don't, lots of times news articles are not always accurate, so I'm going to say that. But one of the things that was surprising to me is that they indicated that at least the part of the contract that deals with the potential for Jen's facility was not put out to bid. There was no RFP. Is that accurate? And
Not exactly.
okay,
They got some things right and some things not quite right. We did put out RFPs, but we didn't get any responses.
well, that's what I recalled happening, because I remember you had said that, or you or Erica had said that here earlier.
And we did hear from this particular provider some interest and some questions. And so we were trying to open Middlesex. As you recall, it kept getting delayed and kept getting delayed. And a part of that was not having any responses to the RFP or having a provider. So when they showed interest, we went back to them and said, what do you think? How could we do this?
Mhm.
And eventually they came around and agreed to be the provider.
So one of the questions, and I want to say, we heard earlier this year in January, so I don't know if it's changed since then, but legal representation for the youth who have been at Red Clover have expressed satisfaction with the support and the programming that the youth have been getting there. So I just want to say that at the outset. But it was concerning, I have to say, to look at the data from this particular organization and the number of cases that have been brought into light around potential and some confirmed child abuse situations. And was DCF aware of that when they contracted with this organization?
I'll say we were aware of some of it. We had a certain comfort level with this provider due to their history in the state of Vermont. With the Vermont School for Girls, my understanding there's some
Cases there.
really serious allegations there now that are under investigation. So I won't comment on any of the specifics.
Right.
Criminal investigation by our licensing unit. They're related to the Beckett family of services, the Sentinel group that is now doing Red Clover. We've had really good results and an excellent, that's a support and services kind of support and stabilization wraparound for foster families who are dealing with really complex kids to keep them in foster care and not have them go into residential. We had really good results with them on that. We knew of some of the history. We did some vetting. The extent of the New Hampshire lawsuits, I don't think we were fully aware, but just know, and we're still digging on that, but just know that that's multiple service providers. It involves the former Sununu Center and Mount Prospect Academy, which is run by this affiliated organization, running Red Clover now. So yeah, lots of very concerning things in there. The last thing we want to do is have traumatized youth in our care re-traumatized. This is an incredibly tragic situation. We need to make sure we have eyes in all of those facilities, that we have the pieces in place to check up on these kids when they're in residential care. But we are in the first 6 months of Red Clover running. We've heard many positive things. We're in there every other week talking to the kids. And we're seeing some really good results out of there. In 6 months, they have to report whenever a restraint happens, because that's kind of a sign of kids in crisis escalating and not liking what's happening there. I think we've had one report of a restraint in 6 months. Sometimes it is necessary. So we're really comfortable with what they're doing there. We've got this pretty good track record at Vermont School for Girls, the 2 complaints that we know about notwithstanding over multiple decades. But we have to make sure we're really watching. These are some of the most vulnerable kids who've already been through a lot. We can't put them through more. We do hear positive things about residential programs, just so that people know. I was at the Youth Empowerment Summit at Vermont State University in Randolph yesterday and spoke to some youth who'd been through some of the programming. We did a panel with DCF leadership and some of the youth leaders. Kids who've been in care, kids who've been through the system as they talked about it. And some of them saying really great things. One about NFI in particular. She had an awesome experience there that helped turn her life around. And she's one of the youth leaders now. So good things do happen in residential care. We just they're so vulnerable that we have to make sure we're guarding against the bad things that can happen to them.
Well, and I think that's the point of the question is, wondering to what extent that you knew about the potential allegations that have been out there. And then, what are the protections that are in place for, and not just, people who have already been accused of doing things, but in general, as you said, these youth are vulnerable and in situations where any kind of contractor, whether it's a foster family or whether it's a residential program or, anything like that, we want to have obviously the utmost care and consideration. So, yeah, go ahead, Representative Noyes.
Thank you so much. So they run programs in other states. Do you know what states they offer other facilities in?
I think just New Hampshire.
Just New Hampshire?
To my knowledge, yeah.
Okay. And if a youth was to be transferred or to another program, that would obviously go through you, correct?
A youth in DCF custody?
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay, I'm just,
for family services.
yeah, I'm just thinking about youth that are housed in out-of-state programs, and I believe you're working on getting that down, and just thinking about this as a kind of a multi-state operator. Are they going to be opening up facilities in other areas, and would they be moving Vermont children out of state?
No. Our goal is always to have children closer to home if they can get the services that they need here. The ones that do go out of state, it's often because we don't provide that kind of service in state. That's what the vision of the Green Mountain Youth Campus is to have both a crisis stabilization piece to it and also a longer term treatment that would, that we could bring some of the kids from away back home so they can stay closer to their communities, stay connected with their families, we hope, and return back to other levels of care as soon as possible in state.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then one final topic that we don't have a lot of time for, so it's just a request. We've been asking for information about Reach Ahead and Reach Up, actually way back to when we were doing our budget discussions and recommendations in this committee to House Appropriations, and we've yet to receive it. And that's a problem. And I hope that we can receive that soon.
Miranda didn't run away soon enough.
I know.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry if there was a miscommunication, and I apologize I wasn't able to come on the first. But we have information ready. If you would like us to just send that and not come in to testify, I'm happy to send that along. But thought someone was reaching back out to your committee assistant, or I was under the impression that we were waiting to see when you wanted us. But it seems like maybe there's some.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think we have been waiting to hear from you about when you are available. That's last I heard from my committee assistant.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And I know you're also looking for transportation data.
Line, yes.
Very, sorry, I can't give an exact timeline, but I think it's very close, probably next week.
Thank you very much for being here this
Thank
morning.
you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate your work.
Okay, so members are on the floor. I'm going to go next door and present that amendment.